Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Polk, and the focus is he gave his all. The year is 1848. It's a presidential election year, and folks want to know, is James Polk considering going back on his one-term pledge? Would he, in fact, try to run for the Democratic nomination and get re-election? Well, Polk squashed this pretty early on, pretty adamantly. No, he's not going back on his commitment that he had made. And besides, he wasn't doing that well physically. He was really worn down after his 4 years in office. He was ready to go back to Tennessee and retire, even though he was still a pretty young man. It's created a wide open field for the Democrats and the Whigs. On the Democratic side, James Buchanan, Polk's Secretary of State, with whom he was at odds so much during their 4 years together. He was indeed seeking the nomination for the Democrats, but he would not get it. Lewis Cass of Michigan won the nomination at the Democratic Convention on the fourth ballot. Buchanan would have to wait another 8 years before he would secure the Democratic nomination. The opposition, the Whigs against Cass, would put forward Zachary Taylor, the general from the Mexican War that Polk had so much difficulty with. He could not believe that the country, let alone the Whigs, but the entire country, were considering this man for the presidency. At the time of the election, Polk wrote that should the election of Taylor be so, it is deeply to be regretted. Without experience in civil life, he is wholly unqualified for the station. Having no opinion or judgment of his own upon any one public subject, foreign or domestic, he will be compelled to rely upon the designing men of the federal party who will cluster around him and will be made to reverse, so far as the executive can reverse, the whole policy of my administration and substitute the federal policy in its stead. And sure enough, Zachary Taylor won the race against Cass. Electoral College vote 163 to 127. Taylor was now president-elect. Polk still had a few months left in office. He tried to mostly stay out of the raging debate about potential slavery expansion into the Mexican Cession, the new territory that had been acquired under his watch, whether it was Texas or other parts of California, New Mexico. Slavery expansion was the big debate in Congress. He mostly tried to stay out of it, but one thing he wouldn't do was give in any way on the value of those acquisitions to the United States. In his last message to Congress, December 1848, Polk said it would be difficult to calculate the value of these immense additions to our territorial possessions. Immense value, yes, but there was also cost, there was great pain, and that would continue going forward. Polk also urged quick resolution over getting governance in place for these new territories, which were currently being governed by the military until some civilian role could be established. Well, this was also going to be much harder to accomplish and would not certainly be concluded on his watch. It would take some time. Well, President-elect Zachary Taylor arrived in Washington on February 26, 1849. James Polk still could not understand how Taylor could be his successor. He wrote, "General Taylor is, I have no doubt, a well-meaning old man. He is, however, uneducated, exceedingly ignorant of public affairs, and I should judge of very ordinary capacity." Well, that was James Polk's opinion. He wasn't changing it, but Taylor was about to succeed him as President of the United States. Polk, in essence, got one extra day in office because March 4th, Inauguration Day, fell on a Sunday, so those ceremonies were moved to the Monday, March 5th, and frankly, Polk was ready to move on. He said that, "I feel exceedingly relieved that I am now free from all public cares. I am sure I shall be a happier man in my retirement than I have been during the 4 years I have filled the highest office in the gift of my countrymen." He and his wife Sarah left the very next day for Nashville. He was ill for most of that trip home. He was exhausted and frankly worse. His health, had deteriorated badly throughout the course of his administration. He did big things, really hard things, and he micromanaged those things. He had said just about halfway through his administration, he noted in his diary that since that time I have performed great labor and incurred vast responsibilities. In truth, though I occupy a very high position, I am the hardest working man in this country. Well, it could very well have been true, and he had impactful results, but he paid for it physically, completely run down. It's hard to believe this was a man who was only 54 years old. Well, the Polk settled into his old mentor, Felix Grundy's old house in Nashville. They now called it Polk Place, and it needed a lot of major repairs, but frankly, Polk was too ill to commence on those repairs. Shortly thereafter, his 72-year-old mother, Jenny, came to visit, and she could see that her son was dying. And she helped convince him to finally accept the church and consent to baptism, which he did. And shortly thereafter, James Polk died June 15, 1849, a mere 102 days after departing the presidency. Now, he had noted in his diary, just when he left office, a lot of pride in what he did as President of the United States. Polk wrote that if on reviewing the history of my administration and the remarkable events, foreign and domestic, which have attached it, it shall be the judgment of my countrymen that I have adhered to my principles and faithfully performed my duty. The measure of my ambition is full, and I am amply compensated for all the labors, cares, and anxieties which are inseparable from the high station which I have been called to fill. He did indeed have a lot to be proud of. He had a really bold agenda, and he accomplished all of it. He finalized bringing Texas into the Union. He resolved a long-standing dispute with Great Britain over the Oregon Territory. He resolved incredibly divisive, long-standing domestic issues over the storing of federal funds, the tariff, and he added hundreds of thousands of square miles of land via the Mexican Cession after a successful war. These were powerful accomplishments, but they were not without cost. And they were also not without questionable means, according to some of his political enemies, but particularly about the manner in which that Mexican War was started. Was it a land grab, as his enemies would suggest? Well, Polk didn't care for any of that criticism. He rejected it. The end absolutely justified the means in James Polk's mind, and there's one person who would have been awfully proud of all of this. The late Andrew Jackson. Old Hickory, now in Young Hickory, the two paired so much over the years in terms of their ideological alignment, and justifies the means was always the way with Jackson, and it certainly was with James Polk. He followed that guidance to the letter throughout his career, all the way to his early demise at the age of 54. That is James Polk, and he gave his all. From the life of James Polk. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.